Hi and welcome to Nurture Your Zest. I'm your host, Ashleigh King, and I will bring you a wealth of interesting people with fascinating ideas across the tech industries, the creative industries, and also uplifting stories of courage and hope. We all go through prickly situations in life. I believe that through courage, creativity, and curiosity, you can find inspiration to nurture your zest. That thing that gets you up and out of bed every morning, the thing that lifts you up and lights up your day. So join me in the studio and let's see who we have in the hot seat today. Hello and welcome to Nurture Your Zest. It's great to be back and to be recording with you, Emma. So you're the first episode of season 3 and I'm so excited to have you as my first guest, but also to be back creating content again. So thank you so much for being here. So how are you today, Emma? And can you tell our audience a bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's so cool to be here. I feel like it's a bit of like a full circle moment. It's great to see the new set. It's also, I'm realizing now this is only my second in-person podcast actually. And the other one, there was like multiple guests. So it was almost like I was on a panel. So this is really exciting for me. So I'm Emma. I describe myself as like, I'm a freelance. Now I just say I'm a freelance producer. I used to say I was a freelance podcast producer, but as we might get into, I'm kind of feeling my path shift. Yeah. Do you want me to unpack that further a bit more about who I am or?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, we're definitely going to talk about shifting paths and the creative economy and that kind of stuff, creator economy. But I'd love to hear, a little bit, if you would say like your top 5 facts about you, what would you sort of say they were? So, so just so people get a bit of a flavor about you.
Totally. It's usually the most simple question, but often the hardest to answer, but clearly, as you can tell from my accent, that I am not from the Northeast here. I'm originally from Canada, Calgary, Alberta, to be exact. I've been living up here in the Northeast since 2022, I think, which has been really amazing. I describe myself often as an innately curious person. I feel like that manifests into so many different elements of my life, and it's kind of been a theme throughout my life. I'm trying to think of any other fun things, but I'm drawing a blank.
Well, we know you're a podcast creator yourself, which is awesome. Yeah. So what's your podcast called?
So I have a show, which we can also talk about a bit further. But I started a show in January of 2020 called The Curious One. And so that was my own show. And that was kind of my beginning in the podcasting industry. And now that I look back, really the beginning of my career, although at that time I didn't know it. And essentially the premise of that show was for me to broaden my perspective. So I would have interview kind of style conversations with other people. And the main mission for me was to understand their perspective. And I loved interviewing people from all walks of life, whether it was an author to a sex worker, people that were just living very unconventionally, quote unquote, and just trying to see the world through their eyes, which was amazing and taught me so much. And I still take it with me as I go along now. So I actually was kind of putting that show to bed. And over the past couple of years, I was coming to terms with that, I think. And funny enough, as I was walking here, I don't know what compelled me to actually go back and listen to an episode. It was the brain dump episode, which we had like touched on. And so I only listened halfway through and it was actually a really interesting experience. I feel like I'm processing it in real time because this literally just happened on my walk here. And I kind of feel like I want to just record another episode of just explaining where I'm at now, because listening back to that was really refreshing to kind of see where my headspace was. And so I think it's kind of cool to encapsulate how you feel in these moments and these shifts. So I might pick it up again.
Well, I think it's really important what you've just said there, because I was also listening to that in preparation for this interview today. So I was thinking, okay, I know Emma, I know her vibe, I know her energy, but And I listened to a couple of episodes, but that episode for me was really raw and vulnerable because you were just talking about your thoughts. And it was kind of a free flow into your thought consciousness, right? And what I would say is I love that. I felt like it was really intimate experience listening to you and hearing you explore those feelings. And I think that would be a great place for us to start. So there's so much I want to talk to you about, but I would love to ask you, so Emma, you have, like me, created content for some time. What about when you just can't make it anymore? So you're going through something that you're healing, or a block, a creative block. Have you ever experienced that? So you did record that mind dump episode, and then you kind of went absent without leave, AWOL for a while. So what happened?
So I'm trying to think back to that moment. So the show was kind of my fuel for years. Ever since I started it, it was something that was continuous throughout the ever evolving external environment of my life. I navigated different jobs. I'd moved to 3 different countries as I had made that show. And so as I moved to the Northeast, my life really slowed down. So I now live in a really small town called Seaham. It's a little sleepy seaside town. And it took me quite a while to adjust to this slower pace of life. Working remotely, I didn't have as many opportunities to make friends, and considering the population size is 20,000, you don't have a big pool of individuals to kind of select from, I guess you would say. And so with that, I found myself just kind of trying to figure out what to do with all of this gift of time by myself. And so I was exploring different parts of myself, and a lot of it was through creativity. And I don't know what really compelled me to like pick up like paints and physical things of art, but I think what was really happening there was, in regards to creating content digitally, my career was shifting more into creating podcasts and working on a similar style project and getting paid for it. I think there's something really interesting about getting paid for your passions, and it's something I'm continuously navigating. And so what I found myself doing was shifting more to the physical forms of expression, and I really pulled back on like the digital kind of pieces. I also feel like there is something to not always having to share what you're going through. And I also think it's fine to just maybe not have anything to say, like publicly, and just not adding to the noise. And so I was kind of feeling that way. I didn't feel really compelled to express much. And what I also was experiencing, and so it's so weird that I'm like sitting in this moment, and 2 minutes ago, I said I was going to possibly create another episode just to encapsulate this current season of my life. But what I was finding until this point was that the container of the curious one was no longer fitting who I was. I felt like it was an old version of myself, and I've become this new version. And I just felt like creating within those confines just no longer I identified with. And it served a purpose, and I'm still grateful for it. But I felt myself kind of shifting onto newer things. So
I think that's really beautiful. So it's how we can change and grow and evolve. And sometimes we try and put something back on, and it's just not, it doesn't fit anymore. It's just not that mask as well that we want to wear anymore. I've been reflecting on this a lot because I took a break from content production, and I was so blocked, and I don't know what that was about. But actually what you've just expressed or explained may be something to do with it, about maybe that container didn't fit anymore. And I think for me, what I found strange is going places and people recognizing you or knowing you, quoting stuff that you said on your podcast back to you. Has that ever happened to you, where you're at an event or something and someone says like, hey, remember that time you did that episode with so-and-so? What does that feel like?
Honestly, I'm not as popular as you. So it was, no, I don't think, I'm trying to think. I mean, I think this is kind of the first time I've really talked about my show in a deeper way, or in a more public way, I guess. As I was listening back to that episode though, on my walk here, I was saying that people had communicated things to me, and people were DMing me. And there was one episode that became really popular. And I remember I got a lot of, I posted it to YouTube, and I gotten like a lot of comments. For me, it was big. Like to other YouTubers, it's not big. But for me and like my really small show, it was like really big. And I remember I had such an influx of comments and DMs. And it was really interesting that all of these strangers were like reaching out to me and resonating with my story. But I haven't had it, I don't think, to the level that you've had it of in person and stuff.
Yeah, I would say my show is still small as well, but I think that's part of where I got stuck is I'm actually quite a shy person naturally, but like yourself, very curious. So my reason for wanting a show was always around impact and uplifting voices and interviewing people that I found fascinating from all walks of life. So it's then strange when it develops a mind of its own. And I think for me, once I made the investment in video podcasts, I saw an elevation in the amount of contacts made through direct messages, through going to events and like people coming over to you and sometimes queuing to talk to you and not being able to get like a tea or a coffee or a piece of pizza or a beer without like there being a queue. So even going to the loo became tricky. And so I just kind of took a step back from all of that. I also think I went through some stuff with a bit of an ego thing. So I think I don't know how famous people do it or big content creators. And it's really interesting watching different creators' journeys. So people who, we look at like everyone wants to be the next Stephen Bartlett. I don't know if you get this as a podcast producer, but as a studio, we get this all the time. People who come in and they say, hey, can you make me like this? And it's like, yeah, do you have enough to invest in 25 people full time? Because that's what it takes, and it's really interesting watching people's journeys, because all of those people who are, making content at the top have got there through hard work, but also consistency. They've done it day in, day out. But I often ask myself, how did they stay consistent? Because I think it's really challenging, as you were saying there, when your container shifting or you growing and evolving as a person. And then you kind of like, which layer of myself do I want to show to people or not? And do I want to be authentic? It's a whole journey, especially when you are a very authentic person. When you then going through something, which part of yourself you want to share with the world you can feel quite vulnerable, I think.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. Like, I feel like I resonate with what you said. And I've felt in my own journey as I first started in podcasting, I started my own show, right? We've been talking about that. And I thought that to get amongst it, like I just loved the medium. I thought that I had to start my own show and be on the microphone and be in front of the camera. And it wasn't until I started working in podcasting that I would sit in a studio and I'd look around and there would be 10 other people in the room that were behind the microphone. And I was like, okay, so I can be amongst it, but I don't have to be in front of the camera. And the spotlight literally doesn't have to be on me. And it's something I think about often because I find content creation fascinating. It's been something I've been consuming it since a young age, and we can talk about that. But I often am on this like weird fence of, do I lean more into creating my own content and like sharing more about myself with the world and using it as a form of expression? But there is such, I think, such almost like value in retaining my own privacy and maintaining my own life. And the more I have exposure to people that are in the public light, I feel like I'm continuously taking field notes of like viewing the challenges that they might be navigating by having their life in the spotlight and just trying to figure out if it's something that I actually do want to pursue. So I think that's also what has made me kind of pause things, was me just kind of figuring out like, I actually don't even know if I want to share about my life with the world. Yeah, it's something I actually think about quite often, considering the digital age that we're in now.
Yeah, I think we starting to learn some of the consequences of sharing your life online. There's also so much happening with AI all the time. It's exciting, but also wow, the stuff that can happen with your voice. So I totally get that about kind of rethinking where you want your voice to be and who you want to share your voice with and on what topics. I think that's an interesting thing, watching content creators as their channels or content evolves and themes evolve and maybe what's okay or isn't okay evolves. I think it's interesting to see people get cancelled. Cancel culture is really, to me, fascinating to watch, because what maybe was okay to say 10 years ago isn't okay now, and it's changing all the time. So I see this a lot with as the conversation develops around things like ableism, around things like neurodivergence or neurodiversity. I think it's really interesting to see how we are starting to shift as a society in how we talk about things. And so there is so much there to unpack, I guess. I would love to talk about your content creator journey. So you are someone who has a thirst for knowledge. And, if you go and look on your LinkedIn recommendations, or even I know myself, and we can talk about how we first met, but you have a thirst for knowledge, and you are right. You are so curious. So how did you even get into podcasting in the first place? And how have you broadened your network in the UK? So there's 2 questions there.
So a bit about that experience. So I'd mentioned I started that show in 2020 and I just loved the medium. I wanted to get amongst it. And then I was always just kind of doing that on the side. I had like a corporate job. And then I remember I actually got a job in marketing, like doing social media management. And that was game changing for me. I remember just being so happy that I could make reels about a construction company. It was just slightly more in alignment with my personal interests. And so in August of 2021, I was listening to a podcast called The Minimalist Podcast, which was a show that it was actually the first podcast I ever listened to. And it was the only one I listened to for a really long time and a big inspiration to my own show, The Curious One. I was listening to the podcast and I'll never forget, I was curling my hair and I was listening to it in my bathroom. And at the end of the show, they did a segment called Right Here, Right Now. And Josh says, we are looking for interns in the future, more information to come. And I just got full body goosebumps. And I rang my boyfriend and I was like, the minimalists are looking for an intern. And he was like, okay, what does that result in? I was like, I don't know. I have no more information, but I just feel like this is something for me. And he was like, okay. And so fast forward, they had posted about it and I went through the application process and I actually got the internship. And so this was actually June of 2021 and it was a whole process and they selected 3 of us and I was the only Canadian. So they're based in Los Angeles. And when I got it, Josh FaceTimed me at work and gave me 2 weeks to move. So I had an apartment that I was living at on my own, got rid of that lease, quit my job, put everything I owned into a suitcase, and I moved to LA, which was a crazy experience. And to have that be kind of my first paid role in podcasting was a bit of, again, a full circle moment, considering it was the show that really inspired me. And so that was amazing to see the transition from only knowing hobby podcasters to it being like, okay, this is an actual business, this is a viable business, and this is an entire industry. And there are roles that I had no exposure to before of I didn't know what an audio engineer was, and I didn't know what a studio manager was, and all of these things. And so long story short, due to visas, I couldn't remain I just decided not to stay, to be honest. We could have, but anyways. And I moved here to the UK and I continued working with them remotely. And so what that really did for me was set kind of this fire under my butt to say, okay, this is an industry, there is opportunity here. And to be honest, like I am in this industry because I love it and I love the medium, but I also have like rent to pay. And this is something I just think I'm like stepping further into of like money. You know what I mean? Like there is opportunity here, right? It's not just like a passion thing. And so when I moved here to the UK, I was just really trying to gain as much exposure and experience within the podcasting industry as possible. I never went to any like, the only post-secondary I went to was about holistic nutrition. So that didn't really help me in podcasting. And I had any chance to have any kind of like in-person experience. And so I was really literally cold calling people and yourself kind of included. I was just Googling Newcastle podcast studios and you came up, a couple other ones came up. And I was really just trying to build connections here in the UK because I didn't know anyone.
It's amazing hearing all of that journey, especially dropping everything to move to California. And I want to come back to that in a bit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, in terms of how we met, I mean, I really take my hat off to you because you were so insistent. And I love that because if anyone knows me, I am not the best at replying to messages, whether it's texts, emails, LinkedIn messages. It's not on purpose. My inboxes just get flooded and I get super overwhelmed. Yeah. And it's just part of having attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
I have to pause you there though. The more that I spent time with you, the more that I was like, oh my gosh, I would be so overwhelmed being in your position. The amount of inflow you have is crazy. So it's understandable on that level as well.
Thank you for saying that because it feels really validating. Yeah. And that's also, I think, why it took a step back from content creation. Because I think when you're sharing stuff, you're putting stuff out, but then stuff comes back.
Yeah, I remember us having that conversation. Yeah.
So yeah, you were super insistent. So I think that is also a really cool thing about you. But I mean, it shows your hunger and thirst for knowledge because, you know, you were reaching out like, hey, I really want to meet you, you know, and that was so awesome. So that's how we met, isn't it? You reached out and you were like, I just want to learn about, you know, what is it like in a studio? What is podcasting like in the UK? And we had the chance to collaborate on a couple of things and work together, and it was super cool. And I'll always really be excited about that because I think that was such a beautiful moment for me to hear about you and your thirst and passion for the industry. I think also talking about money, sometimes when you are in it for a while, and you're talking about money and you're thinking about money and it just becomes, can I pay my rent? Can I pay my staff? Can I, you know, afford to put this out at the moment? Can I pay for my podcast website? Can I pay for whatever? To see somebody have that fire and energy again gives it back to you and you kind of remember what it was like and you think, I want this again. I want to feel that again. So that is one of the things I love about hanging out with you is I always feel like that energy kind of bounces back and you are so bubbly and full of energy.
Thank you. I just remember I had reached out to other studios in the area, but I remember once I found you and what you were doing, that's why I was so persistent. I was like, I need to be Ashleigh. One, especially at that time, I didn't know many women in the industry. And so to see another woman in the industry and then also just the career that you had built, I was just in awe. And so that's why I was so adamant about being so persistent with you.
Well, I'm glad you did. Okay. So you have, you know, reached out to lots of people locally and you've worked on some super cool projects. I just want to take a step back to talk about moving to LA for a minute. I mean, LA is somewhere I have only been briefly, just going into the airport actually when I went to TED Women, and that was amazing, but it was outside. It was in Palm Springs, so it's a little bit further outside. So I want to hear, what was it like and how do you feel? Because I know that you're quite a spiritual person. I know that you are very intuitive focused. Yeah. How did it feel working in LA? Because you did say before that you in this sort of sleepy town right now, there's a lot of balance, it's not as fast paced, and you've also talked about maybe parts of yourself you don't have to share with the world. Is LA the fame centric place that we hear about? What was that experience like?
So when I was getting ready to move there, everyone around me would say, oh, you have to go here, you have to see this, you have to watch this show, etc. And I remember being slightly overwhelmed because I never saw myself moving to LA. It was never something that I was interested in. Obviously, I'd consumed a lot of Disney Channel growing up and things like that. But outside of that, I never felt super compelled. And so then when people would kind of say these comments to me, I was like, oh my God, I just need to figure out where I'm going to lay my head at night. And so it was a big transition. I think at that time in my life as well, the chaos was more comfortable than the calm. And that's kind of a bit of a theme throughout my life. I do find the movement and the big transformations, especially environmentally, I navigate quite well. And then when I got there, it was really just like survival mode for a really long time. LA is like, I said it's the center of the world. I'm going to New York next month, so maybe I will change that narrative. I imagine New York feels quite similar, but it was quite overwhelming. And then I quickly realized, especially due to me struggling to get the visa and then having to, the company I was working for like hired a lawyer on my behalf. And we were even having issues with me trying to find a visa through that. But what it really made me realize was solidify certain parts of my life that I value. And it really made me realize some things of, I no longer want to kind of like negotiate or not have that as a part of my life. And that was living in the same country as my partner. We didn't see how the future was going to work as we both didn't feel really compelled to live in LA. And then with the visa and everything like that. And it also highlighted how important freedom is to me. And so if I was to have pursued that whole venture staying there, I would have been tied to this one show and that one area and things like that. And so it really kind of forced me to fast track, like, okay, no, I want the freedom to live wherever I can. And so then that shifted me to go like fully freelance and also to be able to live in the same country as my partner. I like no longer want to do that kind of like long-term, long distance thing. So yeah, that was amongst a lot of the things. And the other thing was just spending so much time by myself again, which is a theme again throughout my life. But that was really interesting as well to navigate.
I love what you've said about realizing that there were certain trade-offs that you weren't going to have anymore, that you didn't want to negotiate, and how actually that experience gave you lots of experience working in the industry, but also gave you the time alone as a gift to kind of consider what was right for you and where you wanted to be. So I really love that. So then you moved to this sleepy Seaham.
Yes.
And I mean, what have you noticed about like working in Canada, working in the States, and then working in the UK? Because you've worked in all of those areas. Have you noticed anything about working with different types of people or cultures, or anything you want to comment on?
I mean, there's so much to say about that. In regards to work, the thing I noticed about like the podcasting industry was I feel like the United States is clearly leading the charge. And Canada, although we're the neighbor, I really feel like it's like behind slightly, and I feel like it's just so much harder to travel. And if you're not in the hubs of Toronto or Vancouver, there's not too much happening, although it is growing, and it's really cool to see things pop up like Pod Summit, like what Tim's doing in my hometown of Calgary, how to plug it there, which is cool. But there's just really not too much else happening. And so when I moved to the UK and I really wanted to make it my mission to learn more about the industry, I will caveat that, or I pause there to say that for the first year that I lived here, I was just trying to adjust to the community and to just kind of figure out my like life here. And so I really tried to make personal connections in my community in Seaham, and I just couldn't find the connection I was seeking. So I then I remembered the moment I decided to just channel that energy into building these connections in my career. And so that was like a really pivotal moment for me. I started making a spreadsheet of the people I was talking to, and I was a lot more intentional about it. And also the reason that I keep reaching out to people and I have this like thirst to meet people is I feel like meeting people and connecting people is one of my strengths. And I've also always felt very insecure about like my hard skills. So my actual like editing skills, I was never the best editor, or I was never the best graphic designer, whatever you want to plug in there. But the thing I knew is that I could like really connect with people. So I thought I would leverage like use my strengths and kind of to get my foot in the door. And so then that's when I consciously like made the mission to build my connections here. And so the thing I quickly noticed here was it's very easy to get to London. So if I do want to be in these hubs, it's very accessible. I mean, the price is quite high to travel domestically, but I'm kind of used to that considering how expensive it is to travel domestically in Canada. But once I started like going to more in-person events and meeting you and going to Chatterbox, it really opened up my world to meet more people and really just helped me to like build out my connection so much greater and easier.
Absolutely. And I think hearing about just your approach to things there. So you were seeking community, couldn't find it, so decided to find it in yourself, but also became more intentional about the people you wanted to meet. I think sometimes we can do that. We can just try to meet anyone, and that is great. It's great to have connections, great to have friendships, but sometimes our time is so precious. It's the one thing we can't get back. And so actually having that time to think, well, what is there for me to learn here? How can I take this into my own hands? You know, it's really important. I also want to talk about International Women in Podcast Awards. Can you share anything about that? Because that was an awesome project to work on.
Yeah. Naomi is unreal. I have nothing but amazing things to say about her and the IWPAs. So I'm trying to think of how that all came about, but there is this Google group called UCAN, which if you work in the industry in the UK, you know of. And I remember one day I just hit a question in it, and Naomi had replied, and I don't even know if I recognized her name then, but we had actually met in passing at the International Women's Podcast Festival, which has had a little bit of a break, but is coming back in October. Very briefly in passing, and she was doing different things at that time. And she had replied and she answered my question. She was like, "Oh, will you be in Manchester next week for the Pod News Live?" And I wasn't planning on it, but I don't know, there was something about that email that just really, it was my intuition. And so I replied straight away, yeah, for sure, I'll be there. And I booked my train ticket then and my accommodation, and I went to Pod News Live and I met her in person. She was navigating some like personal stuff at that time, so she was only there very briefly, but we'd connected and we talked, and my intuition has really been, as you had said, like a driving factor for me. And there was just something about Naomi that I really resonated with. I don't know. And I was looking more, I don't know if I knew what the IWPA was at that time, but through her and learning more about her, I figured out about the awards. And so I feel like a lot of the jobs that I've worked on, the projects I've worked on, it started with the individuals and the people. And that's what I love about this career and this industry is I struggle to differentiate like work and personal. And I find a lot of the people I work with, I have a personal connection. Like the people around you really impact who you are as an individual. So as you had said earlier, like I'm very intentional about who I surround myself with. So when I meet really cool people like yourself and Naomi, I'm like, okay, I want to be around you. I want to learn from you. And so I think after that, I just reached out to her and just said, like, I love what you're doing. I love what you're doing for women. I love what you're doing for the industry. Like, can I help you? And so I helped her for the past 2 years on the IWPAs. Considering I will be all around the world and in Canada and stuff, I'm no longer helping her with the IWPAs, but I'm in full support of it. So yeah, it's for women in podcasting, and it's essentially like a lower kind of barrier. There's not as much like pretentiousness around the awards. It's a lot more like for the industry and community. It's a really an amazing event. So I believe it'll be in June in 2025 again this year. Yeah.
I mean, it's an amazing initiative. And as you say, just making space for women to get into the industry. So in the top podcasters, I mean, this stat's probably a bit older, but I looked at this before. So there's only like 1% of the 1% are women. Yep. It's mainly men. And if you look at a lot of the top shows, it's mainly men in the charts. And so what is that about, right? So initiatives to get more women podcasting are great. And I think to also recognize that hard work that goes into creating shows. So I loved being a judge as part of that. It was such an honor, but also seeing the range of people who actually submitted their entries from the different types of setup they have. Some people are indie podcasters who are at their home computer editing. Some people were bigger production teams. And I actually really enjoyed seeing the difference between the different teams and different styles of production. But it really blew me away, the talent. So it's an amazing initiative. And, you know, Naomi and I are chatting about how we can support the collective more as a studio and stuff. So I'm super excited about that.
I'm happy to hear that.
I know that you said you're getting busier now. So that's why, you know, part of that's you're traveling all over and you're doing all these cool things. Can you tell us as well about your shift into YouTube content and video content and being part of the creator economy? Can you tell us your thoughts on that journey as it evolves?
So yeah, now I notice myself shifting towards a creator economy, and I can see myself maybe moving even away from podcasting, which I never thought I would say, and moving more into a producer role within the creator economy and like on platforms specifically like YouTube. Since I was 12, I've been consuming YouTube. I didn't have friends growing up. And so I, again, was seeking this connection online. I almost in a voyeuristic way at times of being like, I don't have any friends. So like, what are other 12-year-olds doing? Like, what's quote unquote normal, or what's it like in, again, other worlds, or what's it like to go to school in a small town in Kansas? And if people would document that, I found it just fascinating. And so I'd always watched YouTube, but I was almost like shy about it and thought it was weird that I really enjoyed it. And so I kind of just kept it to myself for a really long time. And then I met my partner, and he was also the same. He would watch a lot of YouTube, and I'd never met anyone that had consumed YouTube. And now as I've gone on in my career, I realize there's YouTube people. There's just people that I feel like you're in it or you're not. And like, it's just such, I think, a really cool platform, and I think there's some really cool communities on there. And it is just like podcasting. It's a longer form medium, and the barrier to entry is very low. And those are two things that I really appreciate and really value. So I've always found it fascinating. And so throughout my journey in podcasting, I had dabbled in reaching out to people that were existing content creators that had existing communities on other like platforms. And I would reach out to them and be like, hey, like, you have a clear message and an engaged community. Like, you should start a podcast. Like, I would, as a consumer, I'd love to consume a podcast. And I had a few bites, but nothing had ever really kind of taken over. And then it was like this time last year, I started working with one of my clients, and it stuck. She had a really great community. And so within the past year, we worked together to build a show based off of this like existing community she had. And so she had started on TikTok and was already doing YouTube. And so after that, it really just exposed me to this whole industry. It was January of this year just passed. As I was building out the show was launching then. I was just trying to like look up more stuff about like YouTube and things like that. And I stumbled across Colin and Samir, who are kind of the thought leaders in creator economy. They make amazing, really insightful content about like the business of the creator economy and really break down the different roles and just shed light on a lot of the like behind the scenes of the industry. And so I fell down this rabbit hole, and I've just been obsessed of realizing this personal interest that I had in creator economy is actually, again, just kind of like podcasting. Like it was a hobby first and just an interest. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a whole industry here. And so similar to my approach with the podcasting industry, I'm now kind of making it my mission to just meet as many people as I can in creator economy. So I've made friends with like a lot of producers, because I'm realizing through creating podcasts, I really enjoy the hat of a producer. And so I meeting a lot of other producers within the creator economy, or managers, or a lot of different roles, and just kind of using a similar approach to just like meet people and chat about their experiences through there, and building that out. So now I work on a show. It's called Reroute with Eamon and Beck. So they're YouTubers first. And so we're relaunching their show, and we're adding video and everything now. And so it's been really interesting working with them as well. So yeah, that's just kind of the path I'm going down now, the shift.
I think it's so exciting. And I think there's something really special about working with a small select group of clients that you can watch grow as you nurture and develop them over time. We've started to do that ourselves, and yeah, it's wonderful to see how the show develops, how the views develop, over time and through tiny tweaks and improvements. Just seeing how impactful certain things can be. So I'm really excited about this new version of Emma. And I think all those skills of, making connections and surrounding yourself with people and being someone who's super helpful and enthusiastic, and that really, I think, exudes from you. So it's going to only set you up for success. About this friend thing. So you said you didn't have friends, but now you do. So you've got all these amazing friends and connections. And you did say that it's a bit of a blurry line sometimes about, how do you feel? So I just wanted to ask around friends. So what's that about? For such a sparkly, beautiful, enthusiastic, bubbly, curious soul, how come you didn't have any friends? What's that about?
I think a factor was that I went to a really small school growing up, and I was with the majority of the same 50 kids from 5 to 14. And the values of the school, mine shifted like as I got older. And so then I kind of was disagreed with the school, whereas a lot of the other individuals that went to that school like still identified with those, I think. That, and then once I got to like a public school when I was in high school, like I really tried to make friends. Like this is the thing, is like it wasn't from a lack of trying. I eventually did find like one of my best friends, who him and his husband, I'm still amazing friends with them. They're like, I was in their wedding, everything like that. But they're like the only people I still talk to from high school. I had my childhood friend as well, but she became a professional ballerina, so like her whole childhood was in a studio. So I just never really had many friends around me, and I just think it was due to like the environment, and I just didn't have opportunities to make friends. But when you asked me that question, I have like a very distinct moment. I feel like that was really eye-opening in my life, was traveling to Australia when I was 20. And I'll never forget, I was like just going through hostels and things like that. And I was like meeting people, and I felt like I was like finally finding people that I was like, okay, like these are people I really align with. And I remember I met this girl named Alex. I don't talk to her anymore, but to this day, I'll always be grateful for her. And she was from New York City, which I just thought was fascinating. And we were on a bus in New Zealand, and I had just met her, and we just were vibing and we were chatting, and she didn't know anyone and I didn't know anyone. And we were on this bus for a couple hours, and just witnessing how she showed up in that experience, she ended up making friends with literally everyone on the bus. And I just remember sitting beside her in awe and just so happy that I had sat beside her, because through her, I was able to make all of these friends. But what I witnessed in this moment was she had an ability that I didn't know I had in myself. And to see someone else kind of like flex that muscle, it showed me what was possible. So from that moment on of meeting Alex, I then went and like traveled more on my own, and I just kind of channeled her and really just realized that a lot of times people are willing to chat and to say hi, and it's just not weird to make the first move. And so I don't know what exactly it was that she highlighted in me, but it just really empowered me to realize that like I can make these connections first. And it was a really pivotal moment in my personal life, which is then manifested in my career, as I've talked about now. So yeah, now I just really, if I see someone that I like find interesting and I want to chat with, I just go up and talk to them. I don't know. I feel like it can be really intimidating. It can be very intimidating depending on the environment. But often when we break that wall down, people are usually really keen to connect. Yeah.
Absolutely. And sometimes they're scared of you too, and they think, hey, that's a really cool person I want to talk to, but I just don't know if I've got the guts to.
Yeah.
So it really helps.
It's scary. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I wonder if that's part of your development to be trusting yourself so much and your intuition is because you had to rely on yourself, and you were traveling the world and having these amazing experiences. So as we draw the episode to a close, what I'd love to know from you is there any kind of cool projects you can tease us on? You did a little bit there. You're going to Pod Summit in Calgary, which I'm so jealous about. It looks amazing. Are there any other things that you're working on that you want people to know about? And we can also pop in our show notes any links to them.
I do want to highlight Pod Summit. I'm really excited for the event. It's so cool that it's in my hometown, and I love what Tim's doing. He's like refreshing it. It's an existing event, but Tim has only recently taken over. And I just want to highlight that. So I'm hosting a panel, and it's about building a career behind the scenes in podcasting, which is something that like you have, although you're on the camera, but you've also done. And so I just really hope it's valuable for people just to be like, there is opportunities here. And then one other thing I want to say, it's an all female panel, and I'm so proud of that. I've had some amazing women that have entered my life, and I'm just so excited to be sitting beside them. Otherwise, yeah, stay tuned. We're going to be relaunching Reroute. I don't know when it'll be coming out. We were hoping end of September, but timeline isn't working. Otherwise, yeah, like if you resonate with anything I've said, like hit me on my Instagram or LinkedIn, because I don't know where my journey's headed, but I can feel the shift. I don't know. I feel like you've caught me in the middle of a transition. So I'm curious to see what's coming up for me.
I'm curious too, and excited for you. And I'm looking forward to that shift. Is there any one top tip you could give anyone listening who wants to get ahead in podcasting?
Like in the industry or a podcaster themselves?
In the industry, yeah. Who wants to get into it? So
I would just say reach out to people and like be curious. And the only reason I know that sounds really cheesy compared to what we've been talking about, but I found at the beginning I really struggled. Like, what do I have to offer if you didn't have much experience or exposure to the industry? But what you do have is like essentially that is that you don't know what's out there. So just ask so many questions. People love to talk about themselves, as you would have seen in me talking about myself in this podcast. But it's a great way to break the ice and to build that initial connection and to give it time, because don't go in there asking for a job and asking for anything like that. Literally just build a personal connection, be yourself, and you'll be surprised over time what kind of comes back around to you. Yeah,
absolutely. Opportunities do come up, and I think you're right as well about getting involved without asking for anything back, because just that curiosity and that freedom to ask and learn and explore brings opportunities in itself. So that's awesome. So the last question I want to ask, which I ask everyone, as you know, and I haven't asked this for so long, so I'm so excited to ask it again, is what is your number one word to nurture your zest?
I think we all know what I'm going to say. I was trying to think of a different word, but it really is just like curiosity and flexing that muscle, whatever I'm curious in that moment.
Yeah. And I mean, having loved YouTube all that time, and then look, it's come full circle. There's been lots of full circle moments. So curiosity is a beautiful one, and it's one of our values of the show. So I'm super honored actually to interview Emma from the Curious One podcast. And thank you so much for being our first guest of season 3.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Nurture Your Zest today. If you're feeling extra kind, it would mean so much to me if you could share this episode with your friends or family or anyone who you think might feel inspired by this content. Liking, sharing, or interacting with our content is a great way to support us as content creators, and it helps us to bring interesting stories and more people to you. This podcast is a Flamingo Heights podcast studio production, and I've been your host, Ashleigh King. If you liked today's episode, follow the video on your screen now, or check out the link in your show notes to find similar content.